Hello, everybody. Okay, so I now have a my first ever Gavo for virtual learning. So, all right. So let me just run through a couple of things as part of a leadership, and then Marcus can also maybe throw some stuff in subsequently. One thing I really did want to talk about was the hearing on October 23rd at 9 a.m. John Paul, do I have those times and dates right for the hearing on our proposed legislation to create the data warehouse? The purpose of this, as I'm sure you all remember, is to make sure that DC collects data related to teacher retention, attrition, as well as other things, the demographics of the teachers, the demographics of the schools, information about teacher experience, so that the city will always be in a position, and people in the city will always be in a position to access that data and know how we're doing. And it's important because, as we know, for a long time that data wasn't public and we didn't know what was going on. Now we do. Everybody's paying attention, and in fact, much of that data is now collected by OSSI. Thanks, Justin. And also by DCPS, and that's great, but we need to make sure that it's routine and it's and it always happens, and we call for some additional data as well. So I encourage all of you to encourage constituents to possibly testify on that date about the importance of this. Maybe some of you will think about testifying, and people who are listening, I hope you will think of testifying or letting your council members know how important this is. Last week, I think Marcus and I were able to sit down with Chairman Mendelson. We talked a bit about this bill, and it's not clear that it will come up right now, but we do think that it will be able to come up early in the year. So that's what we're looking forward to. Hello. The other thing that Marcus and I talked with the chairman about, and I just wanted to let you know, is we talked about some of the issues upcoming that we at the state board were thinking maybe we would have some public panels on or talk about in some way. And they were also issues that were being addressed potentially by the council. So we just wanted to not step on anybody's toes. And they were about to have their hearing on virtual learning. And we're going to have a meeting in a couple of weeks at our public meeting just before schools go back, and presumably we're going to want to talk about some reopening issues in virtual learning. So we agreed that that just made sense. The council had a hearing a couple weeks ago, last week. We'll have one. The issues are already changing, so that makes a lot of sense. We all agreed. So we may talk later about our next public meeting and how to structure that around reopening. We also talked about there's one other thing, but all right. So, and also the shift in leadership at OSSI might be something that we would also talk about, although not until down the line, and that also was fine. So a third thing I just wanted to mention is this board wrote a letter. I believe everybody signed on to it, wrote a letter to Chancellor Farabee, and I think to the council, calling for the Wilson High School name change. And that, as you may know, was part of the report that came out from the FACES group, calling for change in the names of lots of different schools, monuments, and so on in DC. But Wilson, because of all the activism around it, has really been lifted up by the council as something that should go first and immediately and doesn't need to wait for everything else. So the nominations for new names is going to be open through, I think, October 30th, and then there's a set of process that has been laid out by DCPS, and there should be a new name for Wilson, I think, by the end of the year. So I already talked to John Paul. We're going to push out in some social media our letter about that name change, as well as information about where people can make their nominations. So that is what I have for my leadership report. Marcus, do you want to say anything?
No, I think you covered it, Madam President. I think the discussions that the board has been having and conducting with our constituents around the city, I think is right in line with kind of the critical discussions coming up. And I think, through our discussions with Chairman Mickelson, but also through our brainstorming with a lot of you, I think we're getting closer to kind of the role we should play as these conversations evolve. And I think are really finding a good place where we can assert our voice and assert the voice of our constituents. So I'm excited about those opportunities. And then, yeah, I think other than that, those were the big updates. So no, I appreciate it.
Okay, Jessica, did I see your hand go up? No. Okay, sorry. All right. Okay, moving on. John Paul for the executive director's report.
Thanks, Madam President. I just have a couple quick things to go over before we talk a little bit more about the FY 2022 budget. As we are now, less than a month away from election season, I do want to remind members to be very cautious about how they're using official government resources, including social media accounts, listservs from your official lists, and those types of things. You have to be very, very careful that those are separated from your campaigns or from any campaign related things. So make sure that you are not using any official social media or lists to endorse folks or to host events or to do whatever. Those are, because of their use in government function, they are considered government property and cannot be used in campaigns. So just be cautious of that as you're moving forward into the last. Yeah, Emily, sorry.
Just curious, with social media, if somebody tags you using your SBOE account, is that a problem? Should you tell them to take it down? What's the protocol for that?
It would be best if you can contact them and ask them to tag you in the appropriate accounts. But you are not allowed to retweet or tweet anything related to campaigns either from your official account.
Right, but if somebody else does it and it's already gotten attention and likes, and they're probably not going to take it down. I'm assuming that's not on us.
It's not on you, but it is appropriate for you to ask them to change it.
Okay, gotcha. Right, they can do that.
Yep. Great. So thank you very much, everyone, for that. I know it's a busy time for many folks. So to talk really quickly about the FY 2022 need for appropriations, as members will remember at the public meeting in September, Representative McClay brought up the enhancement request that we had included for the past couple years that would have pegged an increase in the stipend or salary for board members to that of the council members, so that they would be the same and happen at the same time, which is I believe it's a COLA increase. I went back and started to look a little at the history of the increase, what it would have been had we had it or had the members had it since 2007 when they were part of since they were established. And the increase would have been fairly minimal. It would have been less than $250 a year or so since 2007. So total, it would have been, if the cost of living had gone up, an assumption of, since 2007, regular members would be around $18,000 rather than the $15,000 that they are now. So I feel like it's a tremendous number, but it is still something to consider and discuss, in this forum, to whether or not we believe that is an appropriate thing to have as part of our enhancements this year or not. As I said, they have been submitted as enhancements, for the past, I believe, 3 years. They have never been included in a budget as of yet. Mr. Jacobson.
Thank you, John Paul. That's super helpful. And for those that don't have context, we've had board members in the past that have had this as their only job. And it's really hard to make ends meet on the stipend that we receive. And then also getting quality candidates. Sometimes money does matter. And that was getting quality board members is really important. I misspoke there. I apologize. Getting quality board members is important, and sometimes that matters. So that's what the genesis of that was. I think with a budget crunch this year and everything being upside down, I'm happy to not support it this time around. I don't have a preference really.
Is there any other discussion on that particular enhancement?
I'll just say, for all the reasons Jack gave for initially putting it in, I think it is important to include. It's modest, and it allows people to who otherwise would not run to be able to run. So I favor it.
Right. So it would be my recommendation then to go ahead and move forward with the FY 2022 enhancements as originally proposed. If Representative McClay, who I know said was able to join us immediately for this meeting, we can have additional discussion on that potential enhancement, or maybe take that out of the vote so that she has the opportunity to speak on her concerns on it at the public meeting. Is that acceptable to everyone else?
We can talk about it later. I don't know that it needs to be a separate vote myself.
Okay, we can certainly talk about it. Prior to us going off of the conversation related to the FY 2022 budget, I do want to also note that we have now, as of a couple days ago, just received our FY 2022 mark from the mayor's office. As I think members know, the CFO has certified that there will be additional anticipated revenue losses both in FY21 and likely through FY 2022, which is going to mean lower budgets for the district's agencies. However, the mark itself is not necessarily something that is, well, in my view, it is not necessarily applicable to the state board because it is the maximum allowable request ceiling, which is usually used for dependent agencies, so executive agencies, to set an overall goal of what they can spend in the fiscal year that you're talking about in developing a budget. The mark for the past, I don't know, since I've been at the state board, has been certainly lower than what we have hoped for in our need for appropriations. The statute is pretty clear that the need for appropriations that the state board submits to the mayor is to be included in her budget in totality, along with any recommendations against that budget, or either for additional funding or reduced funding. And the mayor's office does have a different interpretation of that statute than we do, so I do want to make sure that we note that. But I do want to bring up the discussion related to the mark is going to be a challenging thing for budgets across the district in this next year. And as that, so the mark itself does include a 6% reduction from our FY21 approved budget, which, remember, our FY21 approved budget was lower than what our original FY21 request was, and included some one-time funding from Councilmember Che for us to continue our research programming. So our FY21 approved budget was $2,187,104. Then the recurring budget of that, which is that the removal of that one-time funding from on research, would leave us with $2,087,104. And from that is where the mark is taken. And so the 6% reduction from that is 1.6 or excuse me, 1.961878. So from our current expected need for appropriations, that is actually a reduction of quite a bit, right? The need for appropriations that we're requesting is $2.6 million. So that is a pretty significant reduction for us. And in fact, if the mark were to go forward as our budget from the mayor's office, which has never happened, but I do want to note that part of it. If it were to go forward, we would be forced to either reduce staff or eliminate all programs. We do not have enough in our NPS funding, which is our program funding, to cover a $500,000 to $600,000 reduction. So we would have to eliminate all programs and likely staff members as well if the need for appropriations were to go forward. Like I said, that has never happened, but I do want to make sure that we're all aware of what the situation is as we're moving forward with the discussions with the mayor's office as we move forward. And I will keep the admin committee and the board aware of what those conversations are as we move forward. Any questions on that? Perfectly clear as mud, right? Great. Thank you so much. Madam President, I believe that's the last thing I have if we want to turn to Mr. Tooley and the attendance work. You're on mute, Madam President.
Hello, Mr. Tooley. Thank you for being with us.
Hey, how is everyone? John Paul, am I going to share the screen or are you going to share the screen? Oh, I am now the presenter. So much power. Oh, okay.
Use it wisely.
I know, right? Can you see the screen?
Not quite yet.
Okay, so I've got to share then.
Would it be easier if okay, now you got it.
All right. We good now? Everybody can see?
Yes, sir.
All right. So I believe the last time I was with you in a full working session was this past summer, and it was to preview our attendance proposal for the purposes to make you aware of how we were thinking about attendance, as well as make you aware of our process. You know that we are going for emergency and proposed rulemaking on our attendance data policy. So tonight I am back to bring you up to speed of where we are as far as dropping the regulation for public comment, and then answering any more questions that you have regarding the substance of the proposal. I sent to John Paul on Friday. You should have a copy of this deck, as well as the language of the emergency proposed regulation in your prep packets, I believe. So again, tonight I wanted to present and obtain feedback on the emergency proposed attendance regulations and provide next steps on that package. And then I also wanted to provide some next steps on how we're thinking about proceeding with the graduation flexibility proposal. So this slide is not new. As the superintendent said before the council last week in our oversight hearing on remote learning, she talked about our continuous learning principles and associated guidance and resources. And the purpose of these resources was for us to think about what quality instruction or delivery looks like, no matter if we're in an in-person setting or remote setting. So we have published and been using this guidance, these standards, to anchor our work, our support work to LEAs as they move forward with responding to the pandemic and providing remote instruction this school year. So again, for your reference, there's a copy of the guidance, and then as well as the learning resources that we're constantly updating with LEAs and families. We also asked LEAs to complete continuous learning plans. This is actually taking a little bit longer to review. We've done multiple rounds of feedback with LEAs on continuous learning plans. I hope to be done with that review next week and to share those all online. We streamlined the reporting work and sort of the narrative work with the PCSB to create one application, and we are jointly reviewing questions with the PCSB, and we've done multiple rounds of feedback to LEAs and allowed them the opportunity to update those plans to meet so their responses we can work towards sufficiency with them. The vast majority have been approved, but we're still trying to work with a few to get across the finish line on their plans. So we will work on getting those, and I know that the staff has reached out a couple times about those, and I've tried to give them an update of where we are. So I'm working as quickly as I can, but we wanted to make sure that we were providing LEAs with the opportunity to get feedback and to move to a plan that we can all agree, PCSB, OSCE, and the LEA can agree is sufficient. And then level setting on attendance. So you saw this slide the last time. We've been thinking about attendance as a concept. It's to authenticate a student's presence for the purpose of safety and welfare. And then we wanted to make sure that a student is in their expected educational setting on a particular day. Attendance means that the student is exposed to education, to the intervention of education. But as you know, remote learning has changed some of this. The student isn't always going necessarily to a physical building. The direct student supervision changes in the educational setting from the teacher of record to a parent or a guardian, or even now as people have been innovative and who is providing sort of the caretaking element and supervisory element of instruction. It's not necessarily the teacher of record inside a physical school building. And then schools are providing instruction in both synchronous and asynchronous modalities. So synchronous meaning real time, like we are meeting synchronously right now, like I am talking and you are listening and we are in like real time. Asynchronous means like I can go and download a lesson and watch and do assignments and upload them. And we're seeing schools and LEAs provide instruction in both of those modalities, which is really important because we wanted to make sure that schools and LEAs had the flexibility to respond to their students and providing based on sort of their needs at home and their caretakers' needs. So you heard me the last time talk about a two-part test to determine presence. So when a student is present in a remote setting. So there's two parts, authentication and engagement. So if you look at the regulatory language, and we can ask some questions about that, authentication, so contact between the student's school of enrollment and a school official that authenticates the identity of the student when contact cannot otherwise be made in person. And here's a few ways that based on continuous education plans that LEAs are going about doing this. One, we have people may make a phone call, making contact through a virtual conferencing platform like we're doing today. You can see me, I can see you. And then also logging into sort of a learning management system where the username or password authenticates a student's identity. Engagement, so this is sort of a threshold engagement. It's not meaning that a student necessarily does every single bit of work, but the student is in a posture of education. So this is the required engagement that is needed to constitute that a student. And the way that LEAs have been handling this piece, this side of the two-part test, is submission of student work, like an exit ticket or some sort of do now exercise that shows that they were actually engaging at least minimally in education. Observation by a teacher is like, I can see if President Wattenberg was in my class today, I can see it that she is present and taking notes and she is marked present. And then also timestamps. So we see more robust systems. Schools are saying, okay, you've got to be online and doing work for X amount of time in the LS, and we're going to look at the timestamps, and if the timestamp meets this rule, then it counts present. So the proposed regulation Again, for 2021, we are requiring that schools and LEAs submit attendance daily, and that it follows one of two types: in person or remote. One of the biggest things that I wanted to flag for you is based off feedback from LEAs and other stakeholders. We are not applying the 80-20 rule for in-person or virtual attendance. So there is no fractional part rule of what constitutes being present. So that may have been just with the different flexibilities that we're seeing schools and LEAs do to accommodate instruction, having the really bureaucratically cumbersome in sort of doing that, and we didn't want to like tie an LEA and schools hand behind their back in providing that in providing instruction. For a student to be marked present when attending school remotely, they would have to meet the following standard: is if the LEA uses a learning management system, the student will need to be authenticated and engaged in education consistent with the LEA's prescribed policy. But if they do not use a learning management system, the LEA must make one-on-one contact with presence and provide daily evidence of engagement consistent with the LEA's policy. So again, you'll see that we're preserving for whether you have a learning management system or not. We did not feel that an attendance policy should put some mandate for a school or an LEA to go out and buy a new elaborate system. Some people had these systems, some people don't. But at the same time, we wanted to still preserve that two-part test: authentication and engagement, whether they're using these systems or not. And then LEAs, through their continuous learning plan, articulated their policy and the methods in which they were doing, that they were describing what constitutes sufficient authentication and engagement in a remote environment. And we checked those to make sure that they met that two-part test. So next steps. So we are anticipating the emergency and proposed regulations, which you have a copy of, in the register on Friday, so the 9th of October. I have another working session with you to talk about the regulatory package on the 4th. Our 30-day public comment period will end on the 8th. And we are looking to set up a vote on approval of our attendance policy consistent with our respective statutory obligations on the 18th of November. The one thing to flag is that with our proposed rulemaking on the 4th, we'll try to bring you a summary of what we've gotten so far. We've done a lot of engagement already. Like, I've been to the Everyday Task Force, the Students in the Care of DC Task Force. We've talked with Children's Law Center and LEAs on multiple calls. So we're not expecting a huge amount of, because this has been out here as a concept, so we're not expecting a lot of feedback. But I will, on the 4th, I will tell you kind of what we have if we can. I'll pause there before we change thoughts and go to graduation, but I guess this is a good time to open the floor. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can look things up. I think I can do it by memory, but just in case I cannot, so I'm going to stop sharing. I see all your faces. Okay. All right. So fire away.
Mr. Batchelor.
Thanks, John Paul, and thanks, Justin, for that update. Quick question. I wasn't sure if I heard you correctly. So are you saying there's just a handful of LEAs at this point who don't have plans approved by OSCE in relation to their attendance plans?
Not just their attendance plans.
So the continuous learning. Yeah.
The plans had 16 questions. So they covered things from, and I've got the list. So it's operations, instructional delivery, assessment, attendance, whole student support, special populations, technology, and family engagement. It also had a set of assurances, and you can see the template of that plan is on our, like what they actually had to respond to is on our website. So we did reviews of those questions, and we reviewed them for clarity, compliance, and completion. So did they answer the question? Was it clear? And general compliance. Like this was not a monitoring exercise. Like, our thinking here was like, there's some simple basic questions that you should think about in your planning, and you should be able to articulate and put them in a text box and describe. And that's what we gave out in the plan. So we wanted to make sure that people were answering those questions and that they were generally clear, that we could sort of understand and follow what they were doing, and then generally making it compliant. I think I have 51, maybe 52 approved plans. And then we're still working on like going back and forth on a few tangential issues, none of which are related to attendance. So
Okay, cool. No, I was just wondering if any of them were specifically related to attendance. Kind of what guidance are you giving those LEAs at this stage? You know, the track students.
no, I mean the thing on attendance with going like on like in some of the earlier rounds of review, like we had to make sure that they were meeting both. Like somebody would have authentication but not engagement, or it wasn't clear that they were doing both. So we tried to go back to people and say, make it clear that I can see you're doing both. You can have multiple options. You can have flexibility. You can say, pick, here's a list of one of these and one of these on this list, but making sure that they were getting both sides of those coins is like the number one thing. It wasn't like us going and saying the way you're doing it isn't good enough. It was just making sure that they described the possibilities that they were using.
Got you. And then my last question was, and this is kind of more of a philosophical one, so you can just tell me if you guys haven't really gotten to this thought yet. But in terms of the work around attendance, and just thinking about at least different forms and settings for learning possibly being the new normal going forward, are you thinking about this process around getting feedback around attendance as a way to inform permanent attendance policy that might change drastically because of what we're seeing now? Or is this kind of in your head just kind of a stopgap until we kind of get to that next step?
I mean, it's a place that we think about the possibilities. Like, I think that it's what I've learned personally from this experience with code is that like no one's a mind reader. And as soon as you think you have the code figured out, you don't. And COVID sort of like says, forget that, and go do something else. And forces you to do something else. But so I think what we've learned from this is just the need to be nimble and what has to be true no matter what happens if the world changes, no matter if you're in person, no matter if you're remote, what are the things that have to be true? And that's powerful for future modalities of learning as we go back. But there was a reason why this remote attendance, we are not making a long-term commitment to a remote attendance type. Not saying that we might not be open to something like that in the future, but because we want to make sure we understand how did we do the right thing? Like, is this even possible? Like, what does the data look like? So we're not making a long-term commitment to anything. But I think it is perfectly fair for people to think about like what education delivery looks like into the future and how we can use this to sort of think about students that are disengaged in learning or might have other attendance issues, or even the legislation around school discipline and exclusion. So making sure that students have continuing education when they've been excluded from school. How can you use some of these these curricular resources that you built to support stronger in-school suspension programs, if that's what you have, or maybe like students that have had to be excluded, making sure that they continue education. So those things are exciting, and those are things that we think about, but I can't really speak to anything definitively.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And thanks for that update.
Thank you. Dr. Sutter?
Thank you. Thanks for this, Justin. One question I have in response to some feedback that it sounded like the council got about digital learning. Is OSSI collecting any qualitative information on the attendance as part of these regs? Like if an LEA policy is that the student is engaged in the learning management system, is there anything equivalent to like for how long, or is there sort of an excused absence for a known tech issue versus something else? Less so for compliance is my question than for us gathering data on what attendance looked like across the LEAs across the year.
That's a really good question. Not explicitly, but we have told people that they need to be prepared for auditing. Like question 9 in the plan talked about that a little bit of like, how are you going to like make sure that you can verify like that this was done on this day and like what your record keeping looks like. But we're not asking for all of that information because it's just it would break our capacity to get all that information. It would also be really burdensome. And also like, I don't want everybody's like I'm sure people's student work is very interesting, but like I got nowhere to put that at OSSI. But like
you don't want to see 90,000 do nows every day? You don't, that's not of interest?
No, that might cost a lot of money. But I think I think it's a really good question. I think the qualitative things that we've been hearing have been from our LAA partners, and I think, and just like as we provided technical assistance, I know that I've done a lot of these. It's just like people are thinking about how to accommodate families and like what works and what doesn't work, and just trying to need to be nimble. And like what we've tried to assert is like as long as that 2-part test is met, be flexible with people. And it sounds like people are really trying to do that, and things evolve as they go along. So it was really important not to be like too rigid for the things that we asked for.
That's helpful. Thank you. I'll be sure to keep a note of the auditing so we can come back and ask about that.
I'm not guaranteeing on it, but we told them to sort of that they needed to have sort of underlying information down there to keep just in case of an audit. I think that was question 9 on the plan. So you can go look at that.
Thank you.
Dr. Gasoy.
Thank you. And thank you for the update, Justin. My question is also, I guess, about qualitative data and thinking, especially as we go back to a hybrid model and some students are in classrooms where teachers can see engagement levels and knowing that and being able to monitor that with distance learning is a lot more difficult. I'm just wondering if there's been any discussion about, being or finding methods for capturing engagement as part of this, as part of the attendance.
I mean, it seems this would be something that like lives in like people have LEAs and schools have different student management data systems. They collect a lot more information than we ask for from the state because it's something that the state asks for. There's a certain level of rigor that goes into sending data from point A to point B, and there's rules and there's consistency that has to be done. And we don't do that for everything in the school management system. So I would expect that schools have information, like we have told them to have information that sort of underlines and undergirds this, but they are just sending us daily attendance records, date, remote setting, present, consistent with our codes to us every single day. They should have things in their student information system that undergird that, but we are not getting it because 1, it's a lot of information. 2, it's bureaucratically cumbersome for them to like do that, like to send all that stuff over every single day. But it's like if we were to go and have to verify and check, we would have something that can verify those things as true.
I just want to make sure I understand. So the main issue is that, or a couple of the main issues. One is that LEAs would have different ways of verifying that, and OSSI is not in a position to ask for something standardized. Is that true? Is that what you're saying, or is it just that it's too burdensome to do so?
I think a little mixture of all of those things. I think one is that we sometimes when you write rules and exact procedures, you limit the possibilities of what people can do. And I don't think that we wanted to be in a position to do that, especially when we're responding to a public health need that requires everybody to be very, very nimble, right? It's like, for example, if we could have said something like the engagement had to be like the evidence of engagement had to be a timestamp. Like you had to be able to quantify the time. Well, that means you had to procure some sort of system that required could access and keep track of the time and have it just runs away really, really quick. And we just did not have we did not want to be that rigid in the way that we were doing this because we don't know where we're going in some of this stuff. So you would lose some of the flexibility there, but we are expecting people to have what undergirds the underlying information that they're sending.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I think the dilemma is just knowing that we're keeping track of students who are falling between the cracks, or students who are really falling behind. And I know it's just a big mess right now and really hard to keep track of, but it's just something to, I was looking at, I'll put something in the chat that is from Attendance Works. And it has like a grid for, some of these harder to capture metrics. So it's just something to consider. But I think it'd be interesting for members to look at it as well. But thank you. I will.
Thank you. Mr. Parker.
Thank you, Justin, for that update. My two quick questions. One kind of dovetails with what Emily was just touching on. Is there any formal auditing going to happen for the students that we are missing in our attendance records? So I know about a month ago, alarming number, upwards of like 10,000 students that were missing daily attendance. Like, is there any plans for OSSI to support LEAs with that? Do you know if any auditing LEAs are going to do, or are you all asking for that information at all?
So, I mean, I think part of this is the enrollment audit, which is a standardized process that we would do every year, which is underway now. But then also, I believe that this was a question in the hearing the other day about sort of the low numbers and the steps that the government has taken to work through this, making sure that we're engaging families, making sure that we're having them enroll. I can't remember the specific numbers, but I know that those numbers have gone up a lot, like since that article. I don't have those specific numbers. I remember the deputy mayor answering this question specifically, but not quite sure what he said. But that I know that there has been an effort to reach out to families that should be on those lists and making sure that they are enrolling and helping them, and that the government has been pretty successful in getting those numbers back up to something more comparable to what we've seen in the past.
And yeah, and thank you for that. And then secondly, connected, generally speaking, in an average year, what systems, programs does OSSI have to support LEAs with it? How are they similar or different this year? As well as how might the state board either amplify this issue or support LEAs as they are just trying to grapple with attendance during a pandemic?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So, I mean, our role of collecting and reporting attendance and meeting our obligations to do that will stay the same. It's like we are going to report. We do an annual attendance report that I think is particularly meaningful. And if members haven't gone back and looked at the last 3 years of information, I think that would be the most helpful, because there's some things that are going to be true. It's like one, and I know the superintendent says before, and even the chancellors, is that prior attendance predicts future attendance. We also did some work around 9th grade repeaters. Is that if you are in like attended kids that went to school in middle school and had pretty good, and this was in last year's report, that's why it's like we looked at kids' attendance records in middle school. Some kids were going to school. We looked at them in 9th grade, and it got worse in 9th grade. But then if you have to repeat 9th grade, your attendance is like really, really poor. And that takeaway right there is going to be like, that trend is probably going to follow whether you're remote or in person. And it's just like making sure that as like attendance in the District of Columbia is a significant issue. And like it is hard to sort of be like the sky is falling and like lose sort of the disciplined thought around that. But I think there's some things that we know that are really big drivers of attendance. And it's like, if you have to repeat 9th grade, you need big intervention. So one of the things that OSSI has done, and we've done for many years, is we have click applications. So this is like a business dashboard that like takes the daily feed of attendance and sends it back to schools in sort of a reporting way for them to like generate lists of students to intervene with, that they can go and take action off of. So making sure that the data that they're sending is presented back to them in a way where you can go and take interventions with students. The other thing is like, we have not changed other parts of our attendance laws. Like we are expecting schools to still do SSTs and do those interventions that are required by the rules and by the regulations, and like we've not touched those things. And then also too, I think one of like yeah, that's generally where we are and kind of what we do on that. So one is reporting the data. Two is trying to figure out findings in the data. And I think that our past findings are still going to be true and are still very powerful to take action off of. And I hope that state board members will not only take a look at those, but also amplify some of those things in some of those messages, because I think there's analysis that we did about incidents of crime and attendance. We've done some things on distance to school. We have all the slices and dices by like subgroup. Here's another powerful one is you look at a student's attendance prior to an out of school suspension. So go to school, get suspended, come back, attendance is worse. So you exclude a kid, attendance gets worse, which intuitively makes sense, but is a really powerful conclusion to think about, or piece of information to think about. So I would encourage you to go look at some of those tools and supports as well. And then we feed that back to the everyday task force to try to build this ecosystem of people that are thinking and working on it.
Yeah. One last thing I would just quickly plug. We're having an upcoming webinar, our Well-Rounded Education Committee, where we're talking with principals and parents. And what you're sharing is making me think a line of questioning could be around attendance, especially for those schools and principals who are having strong attendance records, to just hear like what are some of the strategies that they may be employing with parents in particularly that is working. So that is one thing we can commit to doing in the short term, but I'll take a look at those reports for sure.
They're under data and reports on the OSSE tab. On the OSSE website.
Thank you. Dr. O'Leary.
Hey, Justin, I've got a couple of quizzes for you. When are the attendance plans due?
When are the attendance plans due? We sent out a model application, like what we were going to ask people to do back in like late July, early August, and then people were required to start submitting their responses to us at the end of August. And then we've done multiple reviews like in September of those plans. So they were due, I think, in like August 20 something. Were due. But we've had to do a lot of back and forth with LEAs to sort of get to an approvable plan.
But there isn't a deadline? I mean, shouldn't they already have submitted them?
They did submit them, but then we
everyone submitted them.
Yes, LEA submitted their continuous education plans, and then OSSE and the PCSB began reviewing those plans, and we provided feedback on those plans. Like, it's not.
No, you were talking about attendance plan. Is that the same thing?
So in the continuous education plans, there are two questions that relate to attendance. Is one where they describe their policy. I think that's question either 7 or 8. And there's another one about like how are you keeping track of your record keeping? So those were a part of the broader continuous education plan. All of that information was due to us in late August, and we did rounds with LEAs in September to review and get into an approvable plan.
Thank you. Next question. Has the timestamp process begun?
The timestamp process of what?
I was looking at your slides now. I'm talking to your slides. You had something about a timestamp process.
So I believe what I was referring to at that time was that engagement. So the 2-part test, authentication engagement, an example of what people were using as evidence of insufficient engagement was a timestamp. So yes, if LEAs are using that as their example for engagement, then yes, they should be using that to collect attendance because school is in session.
But that's not a system-wide kind of thing.
That is not. No.
From OSSE.
That is not a system-wide.
The next question is, why don't all the schools have an LMS?
I do not know the answer to that question. I think like that is an operational question that you'll have to reach out to individual schools and LEAs. That's a great.
I mean, can OSSE make that a mandate?
Between March and now, I think that would probably be a pretty big a pretty big lift, and those also aren't cheap. But we did not want to.
But it doesn't have to be this. It doesn't have to, it just needs to be a system, right? It doesn't have to necessarily be a very expensive system.
Well, it would be a procurement, and those are technological systems. I'm not an expert in either procurement or technology systems and purchasing those, but I do not think that those are simple processes.
Okay, and the last question is, and this is really just a hypothetical kind of a situation, is there a way for teachers to immediately report students who have signed in but are not participating in class? Because that's what I hear the most from the parents and from the teachers, is that the students are signing in because they can sign in up to 11:59 every day and get attendance, but a lot of students are not doing the work. Is there a way a teacher can immediately respond? Or have you all thought about that, about finding out who the students are who are attending, quote unquote, attending, unquote, but not doing any work?
I think that would be kind of the role of the school. I mean, this is just going back to when I was teaching. Like, I would not report. I taught in Memphis. Like, I would not report to the state that Jack Jacobson did not do his work today, and I don't think the state would have any value for that. But I know Jack Jacobson would do his work, so I would never have to make that report. But like, that would be a school level intervention. So OSSI does not have that type of information, and I can't speak to what every school in LEA is doing, what the students aren't doing.
The reason I brought it up is trying to nip it in the bud kind of thing, because like progress reports are going out this week for students, and there are going to be students who have perfect attendance but haven't done any work. And we don't want those students that, I mean, this is the first crack. We don't want them to slip through any more cracks. Is there any way that that somebody can provide some guidance about what to do about those students?
I think that's the role of teaching personally, is like, yeah, I had students that had Mr. Tuley, I come to your class every day, and yeah, you didn't do any work, so your grade's not too good on your progress report. I'm sure you've had those conversations with students in the past too. I think that's, at the end of the day, that's an instructional, like, engaging with students and their families. And that, like, I can't really speak to like a state level policy around that.
The only reason I'm saying that is I understand what you're saying about as a teacher, all right? Because I wouldn't allow a student to do any work on one day, all right? You couldn't get away with it. But now we're in a different world, and these students are not present with the teacher. And I know I've heard from a lot of teachers who just haven't been able to be in touch with the students because of different reasons. But they're coming every day.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to add to.
Okay, no, I know it's not. I just think it needs to be out there. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Madam President. Madam President, you're on mute.
Thanks, Justin, for that, and thanks everybody for all their questions. Mine is, again, I think we're all sort of going in the same direction, and so I'm going to try it from yet a different angle. But I appreciate very much, first of all, that you made the distinction between attendance, just that they're there, and the engagement, because they really are these two separate things. And I also really appreciate how hard this is. And also, to Fraser's point, trying to figure out where the different responsibilities lie in this weird world that we're in is hard to sort of figure out. So, and that's sort of where my question is. So if somebody, I mean, to the point that everybody's making, so a child signs in every day, but that's all they do. Is there an obligation on the part of the school to have some follow-up on that? So to make sure that child is okay? I mean, I guess do we know that all the schools are situated to be able to address that, and are they obliged to? Or is that something that we really don't have a handle on? If a child is not present at all, possibly for abuse reasons, but possibly neglect reasons, but possibly just because everything's kind of a mess.
So I think there's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack, right? Is that so fundamentally the way that our attendance statutes work is that if students miss a certain number of days, full days, unexcused, that after a certain number of days, the school makes a referral to certain government entities to do on what might go into the safety and welfare, to determine if safety and welfare or educational neglect issues have arisen. Right, that is established in law. Those things. So that sort of gets to the welfare question. The second piece I think is whether a student is engaged in the work or doing the work. Like I think that those are like I think that is really important, and I think that schools to set up systems to respond to students and to monitor student progress and what they're doing. Schools should be setting those systems up, and a lot of them have those things. They have them prior to the pandemic, they have them in those things, and those look very different, right? I think that I have beliefs on what those systems should be, but I am not running the school, and I am not the teacher, and they are setting that up, right? So like if students are not doing those work, schools should have those types of processes, but that's not regulated by us. Like I feel like that's very much into the
No, but Justin, let me just push on this one thing, which so I totally get what you're saying is that you guys can't be responsible for are the kids learning. That is a school level issue, and I totally agree. What I'm asking really is sort of two levels. The first is just really a health and safety issue. We know because we read the newspaper that there are all these kids that are just sort of falling out, right, because they're not in school. And you can't follow every individual one, but are the schools obligated to do that? In other words, you use the example of when we have in-person school, if somebody's not there for 10 days, there's an obligation on the part of the school to report that, and then things happen. Is there anything comparable in this setting, in the sense that somebody could never be absent for 10 days, but they're never really present in the way we think of as present? So is there any system in place? And maybe the answer is no, and this, but so that somebody is tracking the fact that some set of students or individual students have sort of fallen off of the radar screen.
I think I understand what you're saying now, and I think where I get hung up is when I hear the word obligated to.
I'm sorry, you're a little
obligated to a bureaucrat is a big word. So when you say obligated, I'm like, whoa, what? So that's a big word. So, but the thing is like one of the things we did in our continuous education plans, and I encourage everybody to go look at the standards and to look at the questions, is that we ask questions about whole child supports. And there is a question there's a question there about what are you doing to intervene the students that have learning loss, like your plan. Like you need to have you need to articulate how are you looking at looking at formative assessment, and what are your intervention policies. And the other piece of that question, so that's a question with two parts, was what are you doing for social and emotional supports? And what we saw described were sort of intervention type systems based on here's a set of things that every student gets, and then we do this if the student has X needs, and then they go to this and then they go to that, right? So we saw those things start to be fleshed out. And I think this is just some of our ongoing work and supports in our health and wellness team that tries to help people think about how you're providing behavioral support or whole child supports, whether it's behavior and mental health in nature. I mean, these types of systems and processes they're extremely important all the time, but they're extremely important in a pandemic. And this is the place where we have tried to provide those types of supports and about how to set and stand those systems up, and then also how to make connections with with the, like partnerships to like support student and family needs. So those things are there. I think you see different arrangements in different schools and LEAs. I think you see different partnerships and ways people do it. And there's still room for improvement in some schools too. So I know that's probably not the best answer, but I think that's the best answer
I mean, I think to paraphrase in a way, I mean, I think what you're saying is in terms of the safety issue, schools have enough questions and enough guidance that they should be following students based on academic need. And as a result, should end up with, they should know if somebody has really fallen off the radar screen.
I believe that the concept of figuring out like how to intervene with students, like based on their needs, and making sure that you're tracking your interventions and in your support systems. I don't think that's like new. Now, to the level and the fidelity that people are doing it, that's a different question. But like having those types of systems in place is just essential to school operations, and people should be doing those things.
Two very quick questions. One is so the template of those questions exists. It's online.
It is. Yes.
John Paul, I'm just going to ask you to send that to everybody, just simply, and then we can all take a look at that. Because that would be very interesting to know. And then the second is when all the plans are final, are they going to be public? Like we could. So at that point, just let us know, and same thing, we can just send out the link. So terrific. Thank you very much.
Exactly what we did with the plans for 1920. We posted those all online, like those were there. Like we'll do the same thing for 20 and 21.
Okay.
So really quick, do we want to do the last 2 slides on graduation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for sticking with us.
No worries. John Paul, what do I? Oh, okay. Hold on. Share. All right. So graduation flexibility. So existing requirements, you are familiar with these. These are codified in our regulations, is that we prescribe 24 Carnegie units in required courses. You all have worked with us to set the graduation requirements. So there's required courses and there's a required number of credits. A Carnegie unit is defined as 120 hours of classroom instruction over the course of the academic year. And then you know that to graduate, prospective graduates must also complete 100 hours of community service. Due to the pandemic and due to sort of the flexibilities that are needed to provide instruction in remote hybrid settings, is that we will seek to provide the same flexibility that we did at the end of the 1920 school year again in 2021. So for all high school students in 2021, waive the Carnegie unit seat time requirement. So it's not changing the courses, it's not changing the number of credits, but it is waiving the seat time requirement. And then for the graduating class of 2021, waiving the 100-hour community service requirement. So this is exactly what we did the last time with the council, due to just sort of speed and the need to do it quickly. But this time, we will come to the state board and do this through this channel. So this is, I do not have this language in front of you today, so this isn't in your packet. But I wanted to give you some next steps of where we're going in the timeline. So OSSE aims to draft and make this proposed rulemaking in the winter, and then we will come back to you with the proposed rulemaking and go do our back and forth and move towards approval in the winter as well.
Justin, can I know? I think this means 2020, right? Not 2021.
No, it means 2021 next year. January, February, winter.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Not December 20. Like this would be January, February-ish in there.
Great. Thank you.
Sorry. When I think I did the same thing with the social studies. Like I need to stop using seasons. Sorry, that gets confusing. Okay, so that's all I have. So any questions about that?
Yes, we do have a couple questions for that. And members, please do remember to take your hands down between rounds so that I know that they're new folks. Dr. O'Leary.
Hopefully that we go, when we go back to schools in buildings, probably in school year 21-22, completely. Because I think community service is very important, but have y'all talked about the fact that if we go back and have community service as a requirement, that you're going to cut back 25 hours for that year that the students missed or graduated, depending on, because the students didn't have to have it this past year and they don't have to have it this year. But when they come back and let's say they're a junior in high school, are they only going to have to do 50 hours of community service when they graduate in 2 years? Do you understand what I mean?
I do. I've not heard that feedback yet, but I think that is something to think about. You are ahead of the game. And so if that's where we are in 21-22, I think that's a legitimate conversation and something to think about.
Thank you. Mr. Parker.
Yeah, I actually question the value of the 100-hour community service requirement and worry that it could serve as a barrier to students actually graduating. I just am remembering my tour of Ward 5 High School, and the number one thing that students listed as their concern, not what adults were talking about, was whether they were going to be able to meet their 100-hour requirement. And you may recall me flagging some issues about how hours may transfer for students that may have went from a charter to DCPS or out of state school to DCPS. And so I guess my question is there any room? Well, I guess one question is where did this 100-hour requirement come from? I know many states have things like this. I'm not necessarily saying it's a horrible idea, but if we're seeing it as an impediment to students graduating, I wonder what wiggle room there might be to actually adjust that. And then I also recall some charter leaders, frankly, just saying, we're not going to allow this to stop students from graduating. We'll make up opportunities for them to do the hours. And I just worry that that same mindset is not widely shared.
So John Paul, I'm not the graduation requirements this particular graduation requirement predates me, and I'm not quite sure of the history. Do you know, John Paul, where the 100 hours came from?
It does actually predate me as well, but I do want to note that it has been there for quite a while. I believe it may have been a requirement even before the existence of the state board, but I'm not sure about that specifically. I do know that as Marcus noted in the chat, the High School Graduation Requirements Task Force did make a recommendation a few years ago to lower that to 50 hours, and we can look through that material and provide it to board members so that there's additional information about that requirement.
Yeah,
no, so I'm not going to put you on the spot, and I know you wouldn't be necessarily the one right now to pull the trigger to say, but I would hope that there might be room after we're on the other side of this pandemic to just revisit it to see how that might be serving as a barrier for some of our students, especially the vulnerable ones that you mentioned, ninth graders that we already know are perhaps having a hard time with attendance and other things.
Sure. Like I'm not looking to do, OSSE is not looking to do anything seismic. We're just looking to provide relief to this for this specific year in this package in doing this. But I believe, again, the board, I've slept since then. I know that we did this in graduation task force, and I believe that the board had some good debate about the benefits of the 50 and the 100 and whether it should be this or whether it should be gone completely. I don't think that was a place of like sweeping consensus. I remember there being like some different perspectives on there, but I think like that would be something like in the future to think about here. We're just trying to make sure that we're providing the relief to graduates right now to respond to the pandemic.
Thank you. Dr. Sutter.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I actually don't have a question specific to the requirements, but I wanted to see if you had any insights on a question I've gotten from a number of constituents. How are decisions being made in the city on the administration of tests like the ACT and the SAT or the PSAT? Does OSSI have any role in that, or is that all up to individual LEAs? Because, like I said, I heard from some constituents concerns that the PSAT was not being administered at locations it typically was, and there were questions about SAT administration and how that might all affect current students' graduation and college readiness.
I don't know. I'm not familiar with. I mean, I know the assessments, but I'm not I'm not sure of the logistics. But if you'll forward me the email offline, I'll find you the people on the staff that do that.
I appreciate that, Justin, because it's one of those things that I haven't given much thought about since I took them, and so I don't know too much about how they're administered at the state level, or if schools determine that, or how it works.
Mm-hmm.
I'll send you the email. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there additional questions from members? Madam President. Madam President, your audio doesn't seem to work. Can you check your audio settings? As the president is typing, I believe, in the chat, I do want to note for folks that we are also having some technical issues with our YouTube stream today, but we are doing a full recording of this meeting, so it will be available for the public afterwards. So just note that. So in the chat, Justin, Ruth has asked, what will we use instead of Carnegie units?
Right. So to be clear, Ruth, like the unit will still be there. Like you still gotta have like a unit. It's just we would take out the instructional time requirement that's used in the definition of Carnegie unit. It's like there's 120 hour per unit requirement, and like we're going to waive that time requirement out of it. So you would still have to get like a credit in English 1, English 2, English 3.
Are there additional questions? And she's noting that she's also heard the additional things, the additional questions related to SATs. And I will note that the staff has heard that as well.
So if you'll send, like, I think if you'll send me the emails that you have, because it might be school specific, so I might need to know what schools. Like sometimes I need to know like what schools. But so yeah, I can, John Paul, we can figure that out.
Yeah, thank you so much. Additional questions from members before Mr. Tooley signs off? Great, seeing none. Thank you so much, Mr. Tooley. We appreciate you as
I will
always.
see you all again probably next month. So whatever questions you have, we'll go from there, and we'll try to move forward with progress on attendance in November. And we're still working on social studies.
We look forward to it.
All right. Have a good night.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Batchelor, I believe President Wattenberg had to log off to try to change her audio settings. I don't know if you want to begin the discussion on the next topic, which is the reopening schools plans.
Sure. So remind me, John Paul. So what we discussed was making sure that the forums, that the discussions, the panel discussions that we were going to have on reopening at the upcoming public meeting.
That is certainly some of it. So members will note in the assembly agenda, there are the documents that the mayor has provided related to the reopening plans for the next tier 2. We provided those so that everyone has an access to them, including some of the lessons learned that were provided by the DME. President Wattenberg, do you want to check your audio now? Can't hear you. I believe you can go to audio at the top of your screen, or the 3 buttons, and make sure that your audio is using your computer and not another source. That would be helpful. So members, one of the things that we did want to discuss as well is just having a general discussion about the reopening plans that were announced by the mayor. See if there's been any specific issues from your constituents. And then I believe President Wattenberg has additional information to share as well. Karen. Karen, I believe you're on mute.
Oh, there you go. I've gotten quite a bit of feedback from teachers from Ward 7 who are very hesitant about going back into the classroom at this time. They don't feel that it's safe. A lot of the concerns were prior to the pandemic. There were not enough supplies, disinfectant, et cetera, in the schools, and that they don't see that that's happening now. PDF and those types of materials in the school, so that they can have a safe return to the classroom. A lot of them are banding together to talk about how to circumnavigate the request of the chancellor, well, actually the deputy mayor, about returning to the classrooms. It's quite interesting, and the Washington Teachers Union has also gotten into discussions with the membership of the teachers. So I have a couple of teachers who are talking to me, but I don't have a complete picture of what they're planning to do. But I will be glad to call them in today, tomorrow, and the next couple of days to find out what they're thinking and report back to the board.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Dr. Sutter.
Thank you. What I've been hearing so far sort of is threefold. One is a real concern from parents, teachers, and residents alike about the fact that the announcement was made about the plan to return some elementary school students to schools without notifying the teachers ahead of time. So whether or not there's a dispute about whether the decision is correct or incorrect, many folks have expressed surprise that that decision was announced without prior information being shared with teachers. So that's one thing. The second thing is a lot of confusion about what this partial return to school actually means. So specifically around the CARES classrooms, this in-person engagement in virtual learning, there seems to be a great deal of questions from Ward 6 folks in particular around who are the supervising adults who will be in the room, and sort of the information, because I took part in the DCPS session last night they did for folks. There's no real clarity around who those personnel will be, and families have asked questions like, is it going to be like DPR staff? Because if it's staff that DC already has on hand from DPR or libraries, folks seem to have a more positive reaction to that than if it's not an adult who ordinarily and regularly engages in the supervision of children. And there's a lot of question and concern as to why there's so little clarity around that, given the timing of this decision. The last thing is a little bit complex because it seems contrary to everything I just said. I've received a number of phone calls from parents of preschoolers, especially, so pre-K3 and pre-K4, expressing a strong desire to have children go back to school in person because they are finding virtual learning is too difficult. Virtual learning is broken into small and inconsistent blocks. One father explained to me that some days his child has a session in the morning and then hours with no session and then another small session, and that's not the same from day to day. So it's hard for his preschooler to get into a routine. And this is his preschooler's first experience with school. So that there's a real desire that I've heard from a lot of parents of very young children to have those children go back in person. And that seems to be strong and consistent among preschool parents. So that's what I've been hearing from folks here in Ward 6.
Thank you. Dr. O'Leary.
As you know, I was on at the hearing on Friday, and there were over 40 people testified, and there was hardly anyone there that was talking about going back to the schools for any number of reasons that have been mentioned earlier. What really bothered me was the fact that, and if you look at the testimony of the state superintendent, the chancellor, the deputy mayor, and the head of the public charter schools, when they were answering questions, and most of the questions weren't answered, but everything they said, especially with the chancellor knew what was going to be announced on Monday and gave no information at all about what was going to be said on Monday. And the teachers, as was mentioned, were surprised. The parents were surprised. The students were surprised. Everybody in the community was surprised when the information was given on Monday. And now, in the last 3 days, when I've been talking to people in the schools, leaders in the schools, they have no idea how it's going to go down and how the students are going to be chosen for the schools themselves, the elementary schools, is completely opaque. And but that's the norm. When they're talking about a new normal, that's the old normal. It's all opaque. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Parker.
Yeah, a lot of the same. A lot of people are concerned just about how this is all being announced. Just extending Jessica's remarks, it's my understanding that not even school leaders or even some higher up DCPS staff knew what the announcement was going to be. I would also say I have gotten mixed messages. There are some teachers, there are some parents that do want to go back, especially parents, especially in the lower grades. And the consensus that I've heard repeatedly from Ward 5 educators that primarily work in DCPS is that it's more about the process or lingering questions that they have versus not wanting to go back. So for instance, what are the health protocols? What are the procedures if someone comes down with COVID? And it is my understanding that it was shared yesterday on the call that there will be a 14-day quarantine. And then the follow-up question then is, well, what is the sustainability plan if a teacher or another teacher comes down with COVID, God forbid. So a few other things I would just highlight. There's one parent in particular, but I've heard from two parents with special needs students who are deeply concerned about their child not receiving services during this virtual period. And they are not clear and have not been able to get answers of whether this hybrid approach will mean their children will get the services or whether there are going to be tight protocols with spacing and the like, which means that might still be prohibited. Similarly, around the health regulations, I've heard questions from some of even charters in Ward 5 that are already in session. Several of them are already doing hybrid approaches. There is a lack of clarity, at least on my part, and those that asked at the Ward 5 Education Equity Committee of like, what is the reporting accountability for these schools that are doing these hybrid approaches? And we were told that they would get back to us. So those are just some of the things I would say. More than not, I've heard deep concern about going back into buildings on the part of educators, namely in DCPS, a lot of questions about health protocols, deep concern around students with disabilities not receiving their services, and a lack of clarity around how that might even change with this hybrid approach.
Thank you. I'm going to test to make sure that President Wattenberg's audio is working again. No, ma'am. Okay, I think she said she's going to call in. Dr. Gasoy?
Thank you. So I echo everything that has been said. And especially, I mean, from principals that they felt blindsided and can't really answer the questions they're getting from their from their parents, which puts them in very awkward position, obviously, and from their teachers and staff. There are some issues that came up before the announcement that I think are going to be intensified now. So one thing I've been hearing from elementary schools, I don't know if this is true at the middle and high school level as well, but that there's just been a higher number of teachers needing sick days for whatever reason, mental health days, or because they are themselves parents, and there aren't enough substitutes. And this is for distance learning. So now, some principals have raised the issue of like, what are they going to do now? And, the question that came up already, I can't remember who said it, but, about who's going to be in the classrooms. I think that's another part of that issue, is that I think that there's going to be a higher need for substitutes. And I just want to emphasize that in dual language programs, this is, again, like a layered problem, because there's a need for bilingual or Spanish speaking teachers in our bilingual programs. And that is already an issue with distance learning. And there's an expectation that that's, again, going to be intensified with going back in person. Sorry, hold on, my phone just. Sorry, a few more things. I mean, this is not specific to the announcement again, but I think it's important, again, related to dual language programs, that I heard from a couple of teachers that they have put in requests for IEPs to be translated, and that it has taken up to 6 months to get those back. One teacher that I talked to who has done some moonlighting as a translator for the language acquisition department said that he was told that he didn't need him this year. And so he was surprised when I asked him about this. So it's just something to note. I think that, again, our most vulnerable students with IEPs, and then, language learners with IEPs, that they are going to be especially, or I am especially concerned about, are we going to be able to meet their needs in this new scenario? So.
Thank you. Mr. O'Sullivan.
Thanks, Jean Paul. I share the same sentiment with everyone else who's spoken. I remember when the announcement was made, and probably shouldn't say this, I'm supposed to be in class, and I was, but I was like watching the press conference or whatever, and it kind of just reminded me of it felt like a TV show, really. Like it felt like there were just it felt like a bunch of optics and a bunch of things that you would expect in some sort of like movie where you're waiting on the big decision. But the problem with that is it didn't feel there was some sort of process where the people whose lives are going to be affected by the decision got to really have their own input. And I'm also a bit worried about like if like no one in DCPS knew about the decision, and if teachers didn't know, then like that means that they're just as blindsided as like the rest of us are, but they're the ones who may be going into the building. And like, even though I am a high schooler, and even though I'm a student rep and I'm in high school, I still am also concerned for the elementary school students who will be returning to school, because right now, like, there's so many unanswered questions about what sort of protocols are going to be in place, like you guys have all said. And it honestly just feels like this entire process is being very rushed. And November is almost a month away. And if this is the first, a lot of people, like if we're just hearing about the decision on Monday, I don't know if a month is enough time to get everything situated and to actually ensure the proper health protocols, health and safety protocols are in place. So I'm just a bit worried that what has been implemented, or what or what the plan is not very thought out at the current moment, and it feels almost that like the students and the parents are kind of going in like blind, and I don't know, it's just very concerning for me because even though high schoolers won't return until at least January, I'm still concerned about the elementary school students who will be returning.
Thank you. President Wattenberg, should we test your audio again? Nope. You're on mute again. Hold on one second. Try now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Okay. I can wait, but I'm glad I'm heard. All right.
Go ahead.
Oh, is it up to me? Has everybody talked? So I guess my reactions and the reactions I've heard from people again are very similar. People are just stunned that for the second time now, there's sort of been this suddenness about requiring teachers to say whether they're going to come in, the decision to go back without talking to people. People are really stunned. And to Alex's point about the planning, I think people are just entirely missed that you had all summer, then you had all fall, and now the plans are being announced, and you have no time flat to get everything ready. And if you look at the timelines, the HVAC, which everybody has known as an issue since the spring, is finally due to be checked finally the Friday before school starts. So it's just kind of, it's upsetting. So, and I agree with what everybody said. So what I want to just put on the floor is, so our public meeting is going to be, I think, 2.5 weeks before school starts. This will obviously be a big issue. I would imagine that we'll have a lot of public testimony as we did last time. I think we want to have, probably a panel on it. And I want to talk a little bit and get people's ideas about that. Try to invite some people from the agencies, also invite maybe some health experts just to try to provide some perspective on this. Concerns are. And then also, I think we should think about having a resolution. And I drafted something today. I don't want, and John Paul is going to send it to people. It is literally, I think I did it in a very short amount of time, just so that we could have something so we could talk about it. And then we have 2 weeks to sort of just, figure out what specific points we want to make if these aren't them. But the gist would be, I think, or at least what's in this draft is, I guess the other side of what I was saying is, had it not been for the lack of planning and had it not been for the lack of input and the lack of prior notification, the outline of the plan from DCPS I thought was very much in line with a lot of things that a lot of people have said, which is don't try to open up everything at once, scale it. Start with the kids who need the most support. Start with your youngest kids. And they did that. And, the hybrid model, I think everybody thought was a little crazy. This doesn't do the hybrid. So I thought there was a lot in it that made a lot of sense. But that said, the details are where the health and safety is, and people aren't comfortable with it. I don't know enough about it, but people don't have confidence in it. That's a loser, even if it is a safe plan, but we don't know. So anyway, so I try to lay some of that out in the resolution. Like I say, it's entirely up for discussion. We can talk about it now. People can send me stuff to put into it, and we can go back and forth online. But I do also want to hear from people about what we might do at the public meeting, because I think there'll be a lot of interest and a lot of desire to hear some answers and hear some guidance from people. Maybe one thing that's been on my mind is to try to get someone who really is an expert on HVAC to talk about what do you need and how would you know it's really, really functioning. I mean, none of us are experts, neither are principals. How's everybody going to know, and how are people going to be confident? So with that, let me just open it up. Any discussion on that? I see Fraser, then Marcus.
Would it be possible that we could start our public meeting earlier than like maybe 4 o'clock? Because we're going to have, I mean, is that unthinkable?
Well, I'm glad you raised that because there's another logistical issue which I had posed to John Paul and Marcus that we didn't really resolve, which is could we start with some public comments, but not have it go forever, right? So that we would have public comments starting either at 5:30 or maybe we could start it earlier and then cut it off after, say, an hour or something so that we could have the panels that we invited at the time we invited them. So we don't have what we had with social studies where people had to stay 2 extra hours. And then we would go back to the public comment. So, so think about that. And John Paul, is there any reason why we can't start? I think 4 might be too early, but.
Well, we start this at 5.
Yeah.
I mean, the working session, right, used to begin at 4:30. And we shifted it. And I believe the public meeting was originally designed to start at 5:30 so that folks could come
Right.
to the public meeting after work hours. In a virtual environment, that's a little bit different. We might also be able to solicit video testimony rather than having folks have to come live and do it. We're already doing that through some of our YouTube work, so we might be able to do that. But there's no statutory or regulatory reason on why we couldn't start earlier, as long as we know what time it is and notice the time in the DC Register. And we would need to do that sometime soon. We can change the timing of our meetings.
Can I just make a suggestion? Or, I mean, it's sort of a point, I guess, which is that people who would be on the panel might actually prefer to be on a panel during their actual work hours rather than after. I mean, I don't know if they could, but if it were at 4:30, that's close enough to if you work 9 to 5, you know. So it's just the thought that maybe the panel could go first and then, you know, have the testimony after that. Just a thought. And also I was going to say about having people, I mean, people could send in video the way they send in written testimony, but it's nice to be able to ask questions. So I would rather have the live testimony.
And if they did send in the videos, I'd want to show it, not just have it sort of. I like the live better. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just say very quickly, I think it's a really good idea to figure out how we adjust to make sure we have the time to, I think, get to what we assume will be a pretty hefty group of folks. On the last question around kind of what we've been hearing, and I raised my hand late, which is why I just wanted to jump in and say that the general things are pretty consistent from teachers and school leaders and families in Ward 8. I think the thing that I've also personally been taken aback by is just one, the sheer lack of clarity on, for sure, the process and procedure, but also just the sheer lack of clarity in how we execute a plan, blind of clarity around staffing, right? There's no firm agreement at this stage with the union. There's no clear picture around how many teachers are saying they'll be ready to show up on the first day, and not knowing that number means that I don't see how the system can be anticipating a contingency plan for replacing teachers who have to go take care of a family member or, God forbid, get ill. All of those things just don't make sense. And then I think the even more concerning part is that it seems like, I think through examples we've seen today, but also over the last few months, a culture that seems to also shut out real, voice of concern of folks working on the ground. And if there's no surety that those voices are being listened to and that their real concerns are being addressed with fidelity, it's going to be hard for families and, quite frankly, hard for us as elected representatives to convince our families that returning in November is the safe thing for them to do for our youngest learners. So all of that's really concerning for me. And so on the part of the panel, for sure, my hope would be that we could have some health experts to talk about kind of the mechanics of what a safe building looks like, both physically, but also in terms of like air quality, and what, kind of the choreography of like movement around the building has to be to really ensure safety. And then for sure, folks from the administration who can fill in these huge holes in information that it doesn't seem anybody has, and that very few people, if it does exist, had until about 48 hours ago. So those I think are my big concerns, and would hopefully be the folks we could draw in for a discussion like this.
Madam President, I don't know that you have. So, Madam President, also, I want to note that a number of members have been using the raise your hand feature, which I know you can't see. So do you want me to call folks, or do you want to do it? Either way is fine. I just want to.
I saw Jessica and then Karen, but if there were people that had put their hands up prior, why don't you call on them first?
Okay, so I believe Mr. Parker did have his hand up first.
I will be quick. Connected to Marcus's, just what we're hearing, I think we would all be remiss if we didn't mention the bombshell news today of the ousting of School Without Walls principal, which just, I think, continues in this trend of silencing critics, a lack of engagement, transparency that is deeply, deeply, deeply concerning. And if possible, it would be great to just get more insight around what is happening there. That aside, to your point, Ruth, about a potential panel, I think it would be really important for us to invite the executive. And so Dr. Nesbitt, if she would be willing to join us, I think would be a critical voice to say why this is or is not a safe option to open schools. I say that because repeatedly I've heard from Deputy Mayor Kine that the only time that they would choose to open up schools is when the data metrics would say it's healthy to do so. This announcement is coming curiously while rates are on the rise. And so I would really love to get an explanation from Dr. Nesbitt or someone in that office to say, why is this medically sound, as well as any other medical professionals that might also just be able to provide insight, as well as teachers. I think members of the WTU would be great candidates. I think teachers beyond the WTU, also in our charter sector, just to hear both about concerns, but I would also want to hear from those charter teachers that may have already been in school in hybrid fashion. As I mentioned, several Ward 5 schools are already doing this. And like, what is it like? What have they learned? What recommendations would they offer us? Yeah, and so those would just be my two: medical professionals and educators, not just WTU, but certainly them, as well as maybe some charter teachers that have already started this hybrid approach.
And I would just throw in, I know we're gonna go around, but I would also like to have folks from the WTU, maybe from the administrators union, also to sort of talk about what they're still lacking, or maybe everybody can have it together by then, and it could be a great meeting where everybody is there sort of saying, everything's in place, here it is, and everybody's for it, which would be great. So.
Thank you. Ms. Williams. Go ahead, Ms. Williams.
Okay, I'm concerned about the HVAC systems in the schools, whether the environment is safe, and I'm proposing, how do we find out that kind of information? Is there a way to determine from general services how that, the individual HVAC systems are working? Because you can have a clean school, but if it doesn't have good air circulation, there's still an issue.
Agree.
Anybody have any thoughts on that? Huh? I'm sorry.
So I think that question comes up all the time. I think getting someone who can speak on that is really critical. So I totally take that recommendation.
Okay, well, thank you. I mean, I think it's critical because if you don't have a good airflow system, then you're defeating your purpose.
Thank you. Did you have additional questions, Ms. Williams?
No, that was it. I just wondered if there was a way we could find out, what's being done about that issue.
Yeah, I think we will certainly look into it. Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Sutter?
Yeah, thanks. So similar to Mr. Batchelor, I just want to call out something I put in the chat so it's on the video for record. I neglected to mention when I was sharing things I'd heard, and I think it's helpful in light of the equity policy and framework we just voted on as a board to talk about the inequitable nature of the way seats are planning. It sounds like DCPS is planning to allocate seats for the in-person learning. So I used in the chat a couple of examples from Ward 6, a ward where we have some schools with very low percentages of students at risk and others with much more significant percentages of students at risk, that if every school is getting allocated one class per grade, some schools are going to not be able to fill that with at-risk students and thus be able to extend the opportunity to more students. And other schools in my ward will not be able to accommodate maybe even half their at-risk kids under that set of numbers. And so it seems like the inequitable nature of the way seat allocation is planned here for the in-person learning is something I hope we will mention in our resolution as part of our commitment to using our equity framework to sort of guide our statements. But it's also something I hope we'll ask about, because I think that really is a problem, that it sounds like it was an equal decision, one class per grade at every school, versus an equitable decision. And that concerns me. The other thing I wanted to raise about the resolution and the panel is I hope we can either make a distinction and say we want to talk about DCPS reopening and focus the panel on that, or we say we want to talk about school reopening and we make a concerted effort to really get a representative set of folks to speak with us. So if we do focus both our resolution and our panel on school reopening, I think on the HVAC question, for instance, KIPP DC got published in some paper or online publication that is specific to architecture, talking about the HVAC updates they made in all of their buildings prior to any in-person returning. So like they might be a voice that can come speak on the HVAC as a large LEA in the city that has made HVAC modifications and gotten public third-party recognition for it. Similarly, there have been some interesting publications about the Social Justice School, a brand new school that's doing a lot of outdoor education. And I know there's a lot of talk and interest in what that could look like as opposed to in-school return. And I wonder if perhaps we could reach out to folks to ask them to come speak on that, as well as any charter teachers whose schools have not implemented things similar to the concerns we're hearing raised by WTU members, and inviting teachers from those LEAs to return. That would be my preference if we could focus our interest in the statewide set of school reopening questions and make sure that we get a broad spectrum of folks to come speak. The last thing I'll say is on the question about the School Without Walls principle, I would urge us to be cautious as we talk about issues specific to school personnel, because it feels like it's a rapidly changing and adjusting story. And I just hope that we don't put carts before horses when we talk about the process. I just glanced at Perry Stein's article, which suggests that there may be other prior things to the situation of COVID that may be linked to the principal's departure. So just a general statement on something that's on my mind, because I saw lots of outcry about it initially, but if you're anything like me, the COVID fatigue is setting in with the news changing so fast that it feels like the first time I hear something, the news may be different just a few minutes later.
Thank you. Dr. Gasoy.
Thank you. So I was going to say, yeah, it would be good to hear from LEAs that are doing outdoor learning. I think that's very relevant now, just to hear what's possible. I know Bria is doing, has been doing it from the beginning, and I tuned into the OSCE. I don't remember what it's called, but they had a meeting, early childhood meeting, where they interviewed some of the folks from BRIA, and it was really impressive and interesting. So I would recommend maybe reaching out to them. The social justice school, I don't know what they're doing, but I'm excited to hear that they're doing outdoor learning. So that was one thing. I'm just going to put it out there that maybe it would be good to at least invite the key players here to be on a panel together. So, Liz Davis and Chancellor Farabee and the DME and maybe the administrators union leader to have a conversation, a public conversation together. And I will just say that, when there was the controversy over the mayor's decision around Banneker, one of the early Ward 1 Education Council meetings brought all of the stakeholders together, and they had never been in the same room together. So we had Deputy Mayor Kine, we had a representative from DCPS, we had stakeholders from Shaw and from Banneker, and it was an amazing conversation, actually. And everybody was sort of surprised afterwards, I guess I would say. I know some of you were there, but it felt really productive. And I think sometimes we make this assumption that folks have spoken to each other, and I know they are in conversation, but this is a different way of doing it. It's you have the public watching you, and so I don't know. It maybe brings out our better spirits when we know people are watching us. But anyway, it's just a thought and a suggestion. I had one other thought that I might come back to. I can't remember what it was.
Ms. McClay?
Am I on? Am I
Yes, go ahead.
Let me just respond to a couple things that have come up. Sort of going backwards just to Emily's point, we have extended invitations to, I think, DME and the Chancellor. We don't yet have full details about, the proposals or the yeses or nos. So we're working on it, but that we have started with that part. I don't know what they'll say. Second, to Jessica's point, I think that's a really good point about the sectors, and I think maybe what we need to do is have sort of maybe think of a set of things that are particularly relevant to DCPS as half of the city, and then another set of things that are relevant to the charter sector or the whole city. So we can do some thinking about that. But I think that's right. And I just have a question for somebody at some point, which is the extent to which the charter sector, whether we have a sense that the charter schools plan to more aggressively now go back in some mode, given that DCPS has. So I don't know the answer to that. If others do, I'm interested.
I'll just say PCSB is tracking it on their website and it's updating in real time. So I'll put the link in the chat.
Thanks.
Thank you. So we do have a couple more members who also have questions. So Ms. McClay?
Yeah, so I've been listening to all of the ideas, and it seems to me that this is very scattered. I would like, and I would suggest that we try to limit our panelists to some of the things that we can control. We are not a board that deals with facilities management. I mean, if I actually do agree with Emily that perhaps that we should have representatives from OSCE, the Chancellor's office, the Mayor's office, etc. But I mean, having an HVAC person, like what is that? I don't think that would be the best use of our time or the best use of these panels. That goes as well with personnel management. That is not something that this board deals with, and we really should not be weighing in on that, especially at a public meeting. I do agree with Jessica that we should, if that's something that you would like to speak about on your own time, but I really don't think that needs to be tied into this discussion at our meeting. I also think that we do need to have a broad spectrum of ideas and what are the things going on to allow for in-person instruction to happen safely and to move forward in a highly good manner. We don't want to fall back 2 months from now and have things go awry. We want to continue in a positive direction. And so what are those good things that are going on in other schools? We Jessica just listed a ton of examples. I have several more of schools that are doing really outstanding in-person things right now. And I think we should really capitalize on what are some of the benefits to in-person instruction to make sure that moving forward, we continue on a positive trend. But really, we should probably broaden, or instead of having such a broad spectrum of different ideas, we should probably limit who we have.
Thank you. So I see two more hands. So Mr. Parker? Nope. Okay. If you could lower your hands as well. Dr. O'Leary.
I don't think that the argument is that of what education is going on in the buildings. I think the argument is, are the buildings safe for students once they go in the building? It's not a matter of we know that the teachers and everybody that's teaching right now is doing the best they can. And there are buildings that are safe, but we don't know about the buildings in DCPS and whether or not they're safe. And we haven't been given any concrete information that they are. That's all I want to say about that.
How does that relate to standards, though, and what we have control over? That's what I'm trying to say. Having an HVAC person has nothing to do with the standards and what we as a board oversee. We are going outside of our realm once again by having someone having an HVAC or a facilities person talk about health and safety of DCPS.
So
I don't see that as the best use of our time.
Okay.
Fraser, if you want to finish, you can finish, but then we're going
I'm just saying that we are representing the parents, the students, the teachers, and the administrators in all of these buildings. And it's very important that they can work in an environment where it's very safe. And we haven't been given the information. It's got nothing to do with the education. It has to do with their lives.
All right.
I understand that, but I also want to make a point that you're also stepping on the chancellor's toes. That is a direct job description of what the chancellor's office does, and I would rather hear from the chancellor's office directly than someone outside of the office.
So will we.
No, guys, you've both spoken. I'm moving on. But I hear that some people think it's important to hear about safety because our constituents want to hear about it, and some people or one person doesn't. So I get that. All right. Anybody else on this before we move on? I don't see any physical hands. Any? Okay. All right. Okay.
Just quick. I'm sorry, just quick logistical question. How will we make the determination? Or I imagine, well, yeah, that's a question. How will we make the determination? Will you, John Paul, Marcus reach out to folk? Will the admin?
Well, what I would say is we've gotten input. People can, we may reach back out to people for specific names and we will try to construct something that makes some sense. And, partly a lot of this, it always depends on, who's available and who's available to speak. So I'm reluctant to go too much farther than that, but I think we have a good sense of what people are interested in. What?
But just trying to honor the broader theme of what I heard, we will reach out across sectors. We'll reach out to, got it. Okay, cool.
Yes,
cool.
Yes. And also to say, we can't do everything because everybody's not saying the same thing, but we're going to do our best. And
So for that, maybe it's worth us also suggesting some folks. So for instance, Myron at the social justice school, I can suggest, I can reach out.
Jack, can I just suggest this? Can you put those in the chat or email us?
Yes.
Because I'm not great at time, and I realize how late we are.
Okay,
So,
sorry about that. I'm
and
just
I do
concerned
feel like-
about process.
Yeah, no. And partly I was very interested in the conversation. I didn't pay attention. I have good notes, and I think they're great ideas. And so, all right. Moving on to committee reports. Student Advisory Committee. Alex, do you have a report?
Yes. So let me pull up the notes for our last meeting. We met on Monday. So we discussed a couple things, the first of them being how distance learning is going. So we got some feedback about teams having a few problems. Of course, you know, that's bound to happen with any sort of platform where virtual platform students are learning, especially like thousands of students across the city. But then other students cited there were issues with work being given on like many different platforms. So even though they'd like have meetings on Teams, for example, work and assignments would be given on Canvas, OneNote, Google Drive, Discovery textbook, all sorts of different things. But it's not like there is a list of assignments on Teams for them to see what assignment is in what class. So they're having trouble maintaining that structure in their school day because there's a lot of confusion about, okay, which, like, where am I supposed to go to find all my assignments? Did I forget to do something like that? And if you guys remember, part of our student advisory committee report last year was making sure a big part of that was ensuring that with how distance learning happens in the fall, that we do it in a way that there is a structural support which will limit confusion and will have all of the assignments for students in one place. For example, what my school does, you can see every single assignment on Teams. So that doesn't mean that every single assignment you will complete on Teams, but you do get at least that list so that you can have sort of like a checklist. So that's something that we discussed. Another thing is that some people were saying it's hard to see where grades were because obviously people like the main platform is Teams, but I still believe they're accessing their grades not from Teams. And then people are saying it was just unnecessary to have all the different sites. And then some other things people were saying, as I and Shayla and Alyssa said in the public meeting, is that students aren't actually getting a lot of time outside and they aren't actually getting the chance to go outside and get a breath of fresh air, even though it's critical. Because a lot of people say the only chance they get is during lunch, during that 1 hour. And even then they have to manage eating, but then also getting some time outside. And there's just a lot of time on screens. Some things they talked about were having more space, more time between passing periods so that it wasn't like you went from one synchronous class with 50 minutes to another in 5 minutes, but instead maybe there could be like a 10-minute break, 10 to 15-minute break between classes that you could do whatever you need to do and not feel rushed or stressed. And then we also talked about how, about the school reopening. This was the day of the announcement. And they were just saying some of the things that they were looking for whenever the decision is made in January about if high schools will go back. And they said they wanted a solid, comprehensive plan that would ensure student safety. And they also said that a lot of students right now don't feel comfortable. So they did think the decision to keep high school students outside of the school building and completely virtual was the smart one. But then there were some concerns about like distance learning now and if it will actually be improved between now and January. Some people said they were concerned. It almost feels like they're not actually, or the leadership, DCPS leadership isn't isn't focusing their effort on how to make distance learning better, but instead to try to way to get students into the school building. And that's obviously a pretty important concern because right now students want to learn and they want to do it well, because a lot of students feel like they're just doing work and they're not actually learning anything. So how can our schools, how can our education leaders try to improve distance learning in the time being and into January? So yeah, and then also the student advisory committee, with Shayla, we are in the midst of planning an event for students from around the city, from DCPS and public charter schools, to talk about how distance learning is going for them. That's something that we're trying to make publicly as viewable as possible for the entire public. So specifically so that teachers, but then also parents and education leaders like yourselves potentially can come and view what students have to say. So that's something that we're working on. We're aiming for it to be in late October. But since we've gotten the decision about DCPS not going back until at least January, it may be early November. We're not sure yet, but that is something where we will look to feature a diverse student population, representation of the student population, and ask them questions about how their own experience is going, so that you guys can get a better sense of all across the city how our students are doing with distance learning. And it'll also be easier for you guys to pick up on the common trends you guys are seeing in terms of what can be improved, and some of the things going forward in the future that if we want distance learning to be successful, some things that you guys can make better. So that's pretty much where we're at. Shayla and I plan to talk this weekend about that event, and we'll be working on that. And obviously you guys would be invited, and we would love it if you all could share the event when we have it figured out with your principals, education leaders, parents. But yeah, so that's where we're at. And that's what we've been doing the past couple of weeks.
All right, very good. Any quick questions for Alex before we move on? All right. Thank you very much, Alex. And Fraser, encourage people to be efficient. Fraser.
Okay, I'm going to be real quick. We talked about the hearing on the 23rd of October. The title of the hearing is the Data Warehouse Amendment Act. It has to do with transparency. I would please ask you to testify. We need to be, this is very important, especially for us. We had a big problem when we were putting together the teacher retention survey and trying to get information from the LEAs in the city. All of the LEAs in the city were hesitant about giving information, almost all. And so that's going to be very important. The second thing that we talked about was trying to get Mary Levy to maybe do another survey of the information in the 19-20 school year, which is going to be really interesting to find because of the pandemic. But that was one thing that we think is we need to find out what happened last year. I think it's also going to be interesting to find out what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks once some of the schools are opened, and to find out how many teachers aren't going back at all, whether or not they're not going back initially. And the third thing we talked about was the setting up of a teacher council that would work as a model with the student advisory council to get information from teachers all over the city. Probably the biggest problem we have with that is trying to figure out who that group is and how big that group is. We haven't quite figured that out yet. We have several models, but we'll be talking about that at our next meeting. I think those are the three major things that we talked about at the teacher retention. We spent a lot of time talking about it, especially about this hearing that's coming up and the importance of it. I was very impressed with the numbers at the hearing on last Friday about virtual learning, and hopefully there'll be as many people at that hearing on the 23rd. It's at 9 o'clock in the morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Fraser. I'm not seeing questions. All right, I'm going to move on. Jessica, social studies.
Thanks, Ruth. Okay, Social Studies Committee. So I want to thank everyone who has helped us publicize the short 3-question survey. We have 253 responses. The survey is still open until Friday. And because I know we all like a little competitive spirit, President Wattenberg's ward is in the lead. Ward 3 has the most responses. Next, we've got Ward 4 and Ward 8 tied for second place total responses, followed by Ward 7. So, Zachary, you, me, Jack, we've got our work cut out for us. So I would encourage folks to continue getting the word out. I will share that last Friday, I took some flyers advertising the survey that our staff put together. They're really fabulous, and they're in Spanish and English. And I actually took them to the food sites in Ward 6. I also took them to a couple of our grocery stores, talked to a couple of the staff who put them up in the staff break room, and took 2 so they could put them in Spanish and English. So we've gotten, I think, a lot of responses from a lot of different sources. One other thing I'd note is that we didn't have any responses in, I like that perspective, Jack. We didn't have a lot of responses in the other languages. So if you have particular connections to non-English language communities and can encourage folks in those communities to respond in their native language to the native language surveys, that would be super helpful, especially for Spanish-speaking residents, just because I know we've talked at length about how underrepresented that significant portion of our population of the city really is in some of our outreach. So that's open through Friday. We are, one other thing about that, if you have folks in charter schools that you have not reached out to, whether that be charter parents or charter leaders, I would encourage you to reach out there as well, because right now the majority of our responses are folks with students in DCPS schools. So we're missing representation from folks whose kids are in charters or who work in charters. We have plenty of folks in private and parochial schools. We also have folks who say they don't have children. So we are getting a really nice dispersed set of responses. But right now, between our 2 sectors, DCPS is definitely overrepresented in the sample. Last thing on the survey, we asked folks how satisfied they are with the standards. I have not looked at the qualitative responses yet, but we did ask them on a Likert scale from 1 being not very satisfied to 4 being very satisfied. And I think, unsurprisingly, the answers sit in the middle. Most folks scored so far a 2 or a 3. And once we have a chance to dive in on the qualitative responses, I think we'll be able to say more about what folks feel is lacking. As a reminder, this survey came out of feedback from the SISAC, saying that they wanted to make sure that the first engagement they did with the public and we did with the public was very general and gave folks a chance to sort of get aware of the work we're doing on the standards and be able to engage at the most basic level, which is, what do you think about the standards? How happy are you? What would you like students to know and be able to do? Any questions on the survey before I go to talk about the SISAC? Sorry.
I was just curious if you have collected any of the anything with the paper surveys. I have some, and honestly, you know, I was trying to think, where can I go? And I did think of the like food sites, but I felt a little funny about it, to be honest. Do you know what I mean? It feels a little bit, I don't know, you know, maybe insensitive. But what do you think?
So I will say 2 things. One, my interaction with folks at the food sites had been really positive, because what I did was I went and I spoke to both the security guards who are typically monitoring the food site, and then the folks actually distributing the food, and shared with them what I was trying to do, asked if I could leave some for folks to take, but then also invited them, whether they were a current parent in DC schools or had gone to DC schools or lived in DC, to use the QR code and fill it out themselves. And that seemed to go over pretty well. The two security guards at one of the schools were like, I went to DC schools. I definitely want to fill this out. So that was great. I have not gotten any responses back on the paper surveys, though. And I think part of it is that our staff is awesome and they put the QR code in. So folks who had a smartphone just took the picture and did the survey on their phone. The mobile enabled Google Docs is pretty simple. And I think lots of folks are choosing to use their phone, including folks at school sites picking up food because they've got Wi-Fi.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay.
Tend to win, by the way. Sorry.
Okay. I will be sure to give folks updates on the ward-based responses. Like I said, everyone loves a little competition. The last thing I'll share is moving on to the SISAC. So we have our next meeting of the advisory committee next Tuesday, and we asked members to put together for us individual worksheets moving us towards these guiding principles. Alex is doing incredible yeoman's work in compiling all their responses. And he and I are getting together tomorrow to actually start to sort and make some sense of what our advisory committee members have told us so that we can bring to them next Tuesday a list of the principles they've come up with so far, the feedback from the general public, and we can spend all of Tuesday night's meeting really in a process of them starting to talk about which of these many principles they've generated warrants getting passed on to OSSI. So we're going to talk, Alex and I and Karen, as we plan this meeting, what the decision-making rules are on how we'll go from a list of 75 to 100 guiding principles down to something more manageable to transmit to OSSI. That'll be the focus of next Tuesday's meeting. We have our social studies committee meeting of the board on Wednesday. We're going to actually start that meeting half an hour later, mostly because I have to have dental work in the morning and want to make sure I can be unnumb enough to speak with you all by the time the meeting starts, but we'll keep it to an hour. And the focus of that meeting will be just where we stand with the SISAC, what the next steps are, and how we should use our board time in the public meeting in December to work around a final vote on the principles. We'll also get any feedback from the board on questions they have about the process we've put in place and the principles. Finally, last thing, we have 2 sessions at the National Council for the Social Studies and the CUFA, which is the College and University Faculty Associates of the National Council for the Social Studies. The State Board of Education will be featured in 2 of those sessions. Our work on the social studies standards. One is in conjunction with human rights education, and Shalina Warren, one of our teachers from the CSAC, is also part of that presentation. The other is with Dr. Kristen Sinclair from Georgetown, who I know lots of folks on this call know. She put in a faculty proposal and is going to invite members of the CSAC to join a panel and share the process with the university faculty at that conference. So I'll share more about that as we get closer, but just wanted to highlight that for you, that our board's work is going to go far and wide and get some attention at a social studies conference. And I think that speaks volumes about the work you have all committed to, and I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you very much. Well-rounded education?
Sure. You should all have seen the letter I sent out about 2 weeks ago, explaining sort of the shift that I've been talking about at the last, I think, 3 meetings or something. So what that said in a nutshell is we're going to be doing some public-facing webinars. We haven't decided exactly if they're going to be monthly or bi-monthly, but our first one, I'm excited to announce, will be on August 28th from 5:30 to 7 p.m. So I hope everybody can tune in. And the focus will be, so the broad focus of the webinars will be on meeting the needs of the whole child during distance learning. And our first topic is going to be on parent school partnerships and engagement. And so we are inviting 3 principals and 3 parents to come and talk. Hopefully one of the pairs is going to be from the same school. So they'll talk about sort of what that process was like of actually like really working together. But we also wanted to have, you know, as much representation as possible from different schools. So the others will be individuals from, so we'll have 5 schools represented. October 28th, yeah. Did I say something different? Sorry. So the staff is working on publicizing that or creating flyers for that. That should be out soon. We're just waiting. We've gotten responses from 2 principals and 1 parent so far. So we're going to have Principal Jackson from West in Ward 4. She's fabulous. And we're going to have Principal Morales from Bancroft in Ward 1. And then I actually reached out to Maya from PAVE to ask her opinion on, you know, parent-teacher partners. And so I'm hoping is reaching out. She said she would reach out to some folks at Ketchum. And even if she doesn't, I think we will. So we're hoping to at least have a parent and or a principal from Ketchum. But we'd like to have, you know, a good cross-section of wards represented. And Zach has asked some parents from Ward 5. So don't worry if your ward hasn't been represented. We're going to have another one soon. So we'll make sure that, you know, we get to everybody. So am I forgetting anything, Zach? Or Darren? I think that's it.
I think you covered it.
Oh,
Great.
I will say one more thing, which is just that we are also planning to have a platform sort of like the social studies standards work, where we can start keeping the videos that we have from the webinars and maybe even edit them down so we have little clips that we can share, resources related to the topics we're covering and things like that. So this will be an ongoing resource for the public to use. I am done.
All right, thank you. Okay, I'm next. I have a very short report. Our committee has not met since we adopted the resolution on the STAR framework at our public meeting. We will be meeting next week. So I really don't have a lot to report at the end of the previous meeting. One of the things we said we would do is start to work ourselves to just try to think about what kinds of things might be in a revised rating, or how a report might look where you had a rating and some other issues. So we'll do some of that, and we'll take up some other issues and figure out our next steps. So that's for that. And last, admin. Marcus or John Paul. I don't think we have a report, do we? I think John Paul talked about you're on mute, Marcus. Anyone else hear him?
There's a conspiracy against leadership here, I think.
Right.
Marcus, I can talk for you if you'd like. So we were unable to have an admin committee meeting last week because I was called out of town on an emergency basis. So we do have an admin committee meeting tomorrow, right? Because tomorrow's Thursday. Yes, tomorrow that we will then report out for those things. But it will be hopefully for the admin committee members a fairly short meeting. So.
Okay, I think we are done. I was afraid I had let the first part go on so long we'd be here forever, but we're somewhat late, but not terribly. Anybody else? New business for the order? Anything else? We ready to adjourn? Okay then. Someone move it. Move first. Okay, Marcus moves it, and I think A lot of people, okay, and Fraser is seconding. Okay, guys. I'll see you in a couple of weeks. I think John Paul is going to try to get out to everybody tomorrow, sort of a list of a number of these things that we're all sort of promising each other, links that we need to send around and so on to make it a little bit easier because we had a lot of stuff. Thank you. Bye.
Bruce, I do have one thing. Can we get a copy of the minutes before the meeting, the public meeting?
They're usually sent out the Friday before. Did you want them before that?
No, that's fine. I just, it seemed to me like I never remember getting them. Maybe
They're usually in the meeting prep materials that I send out the Friday before the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And I know we've already adjourned, but can I just notice that John Paul's background makes him look like he's a celebrity. So I think you should get called out on that, that Twitter thing where they do, or who has the best background. I'm a fan.
Oh.
All right, people. Ciao.
Bye.